Good evening, everyone. Welcome along. It is Inspire and Be Inspired. Another look at some of the UK's biggest and best artists, producers, promoters. My name is Andy Ward. If it's the first time you're joining me, it's a pleasure to have your company. Tonight, we are celebrating everything Nottingham and much more. Two gentlemen who will definitely need no introduction to anybody from that part of the UK. I will always extend an invitation for you to join me. In the comments, do leave any remarks, ask any questions of our guests. We try to make this as interactive as possible. And I'm just going to get straight into this tonight and bring onto the stream Mr Sam Bowery and Christian Woodyatt. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Hi, Andy. Thank you for the invite.
Good evening, Andy. Doing very well, thank you.
Great to have you here. I can see that everything is working fine. I will say good evening to Mr. Jeff Jefferson, a young gentleman that I'm sure you will both be more than familiar with.
Yes, know him very well.
And anybody else that is with us in the chat. I actually put a poll into the YouTube chat asking which was the best room at Venus, upstairs or downstairs.
Oh, you can't do that.
Well, that's interesting. Christian was downstairs, weren't you, Christian? And Laurie and Tim tends to be upstairs.
Let's move on.
They're very different.
Both very different. Well, listen, I am getting ahead of myself. We are getting ahead of ourselves. You can hear me fine. I would just say again to everybody, because we want to thrust straight into this, we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So please do feel free to leave any comments that you like along the way. So the reason why we do these shows is to give flowers to some of the people we feel are responsible for creating great things up and down the UK. And anybody that was clubbing in the 80s and 90s and beyond will know that Nottingham was definitely a big place on the map. We all had those old wives' tales of the ratio of women to men in Nottingham being 2 to 1. And I'm sure Sam and Christian will be able to tell me how much truth there is in that.
Well, we'll see.
So let me begin by saying welcome to Sam. Thank you for agreeing to do this, my friend. Somebody that I know quite well from my clubbing days in Birmingham and out and about as well with Miss Moneypennies and Chuff Chuff. I know you're very good friends with those guys.
Yes.
But so let's roll back. Tell us roughly. I always say this roughly because some people don't like to say their exact age. What kind of year were you born, more or less?
So I was born in believe it or not, the late 50s.
Wow. Did they have colour tellies then?
Is this open mic? Can we say what we want?
Say what you want. Swear, curse.
Did you say tellies as in TVs? Were there any? Yes, but we had 2 channels.
Okay.
BBC and ITV. I had to go to a neighbour's house to watch BBC 2, or if I feel lucky, they had a colour TV. But yeah, in the late 50s, I was born, not in this country, in a lovely place called St Kitts, in the Caribbean.
Wonderful.
Came over with my mother and brother at a very early age. And settled here. The great thing about Nottingham was it was a real hub of people from the Caribbean, but mainly St Kitts.
Okay.
Other areas that were basically saturated with Jamaicans, but we kept ourselves to ourselves because we had more Caribbean. I think was a small islander attitude, islander.
Wow. One thing that I will surprise you. My birth father was from St Kitts, so that's crazy.
There you go. There you go. Wonderful island, which I happened to go back to on my 60th birthday for the first time with my wife and my son and my wife's mother and father. And we had the experience of trying to find some of my family. Unfortunately, we didn't particularly find any immediate relations. But we did find some people that had the same surname but spelt slightly different.
Okay.
So my name is spelt Bowery, Bowery. We found people that were named Bowery, Bowry.
Okay.
But it's quite interesting though. I'm visiting a small island where I was growing up, and surprisingly more expensive than I thought it was. Actually, than expected.
When you went back, wow.
Yes, and we actually were there when they had the most heaviest hurricanes. around that part of the world, and people were having to leave small islands and come to St. Kitts to survive
For some
because their
shelter.
islands had been flooded.
Wow,
Yeah,
insane.
it's a terrible time, but it's part of the experience. Going to the Caribbean and having a hurricane. Standard.
Yeah, standard. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so paint a picture of Nottingham for us in the let's skip forward to the early 70s.
Okay, so in those days, after going to a club, after school club called, I think it was called St. Francis, we used to go to a couple of clubs that were local to us, and they weren't the best, but they would play lots of sort of Tamla Motown, sort of that style of music. I was into Michael Jackson like everybody else was, and it was more of that feel. And the club we went to was a place called, oh my God, the memory leaves me. But it was prior to the garage, the same venue as the garage was in St. Mary's Gate. And it was quite an arm. It was basically, I would say, a reggae come Tamla Motown club. That was my first real experience of clubbing and meeting ladies, of course.
Okay, so that would have been mid 70s, more or less.
Slightly earlier.
Okay.
Slightly earlier. And then from those days, we went on to, I think the club I used to go to was a place called Isabella's, which was really big back in the day. Josephine's. Some great times, but it was basically just disco music. Remember the days of Staying Alive, all that sort of thing. White suits, big players. Yeah. Good, fun days though, but never really got into the industry at all. It was purely there as a customer. And then moved forward to sort of the 80s. I joined a place called The Club, which is a good friend of mine who sadly passed away owned. And we started a club called The Club.
Wow. Okay. So what, you put a timestamp on that for me?
So that was just about 86.
Okay.
1986.
Well, so on, carry on.
Yeah, for about 2 or 3 years, I managed that club, and it was a very, very popular club.
So just because you were friends with the guy who owned it, he brought you in and said, right, you've got to learn the trade, or did you always have intentions?
No, but I've jumped ahead a bit. I was involved with the bar industry.
Okay.
Before that, but in bars, Sam's Grotto, in a bar that was Jallan's, but before that it was called Uriah Heep back in the day. And Steve and his brother used to come there as customers. So I got to know them through that.
Okay.
And then when they started the club, they were looking for a manager. I was invited to join them, which I did. And then we formed the club, which was, I say, a really, really popular place. But after about 2 years, it started to get a little bit sort of flat. And then I met a lovely gentleman called James Bailey.
Who?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I'd heard about his nights and his bar, and the music was obviously house music at the time. We were playing a mix of disco and funk and things like that, R&B. And James came along, looked at the club, and we said we would do a night there. And then after some consultation and some meetings, we decided to change the club into a house club and renamed it Venus.
Okay. Wow. Okay, and so that was 87, 88.
That would be May 1990 when we launched it.
Right, so
May
I'm
1990,
making notes of this. Well, that will lead me very neatly to Mr. Woodyatt sitting very patiently. Thank you, my friend, for...
No, it's an education. I'm trying to imagine Sam with an afro in the... I'm sure you did.
Yeah, I did. Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure I've seen
I've seen a photo somewhere.
At Chuff Chuff's with his afro wig. So Christian, tell us your story running parallel to that. I'm thinking that Sam's probably got a couple of years on us, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just a couple. Absolutely, just a couple. I come from nowhere near as cool a background. So I was born in Wales.
Okay.
Right.
North or south?
South.
Okay.
I my other half will be watching this, and she'd be begging me to tell this story, so I'm going to do it. So I was born I lived in a village or in a town called Blackwood, and it's the only thing it's famous for is from where the Manic Street Preachers come from. The same town. But at the age of 10, this is like, who do you think you are, isn't it?
That's fine.
At the age of 10, we moved up to a little village outside of Nottingham, and I enjoyed just a typical English youngster's life, I guess. My first clubbing experience was in the island of Kos in Greece when I was 16. Yes. Yeah. And we were there. I was bored out of my mind, and I remember the only magazine I could find to read, which was English, was ID magazine, which was huge at the time. And there was a whole article about acid house. And imagine a 16-year-old unaware of clubbing or anything was reading this and was just completely drawn into it. And then was taken out by 6 cockneys, not taken out like taken out for a drink with 6. And my dad, bless his soul, let me go out with 6 cockney girls who took me round the bars of Kos, and Yaz, The Only Way Is Up was the record.
Was the tune of the summer.
It was a tune, and obviously that was a pseudo house tune. And I was already drawn. I remember buying House Arrest by Crush the year before, by our very own Castro.
I was going to say a big Nottingham connection there.
Yeah, and obviously, I've jumped ahead, but when I was sort of in my teens, I was heavily into breakdancing and all of that. I was obviously drawn to some kind of thing in the electronic side of music because I loved electro. I loved all the sampling.
Had you ever done Rock City and the likes?
What, as in from a breakdancing perspective?
Yeah, from a party.
I remember going to see, I've forgotten the name now, the big crew in Nottingham. I remember going to see them on a Saturday afternoon and being crushed up against the window.
Rock City crew?
Yeah. Was it just the Rock City crew? That'd been obvious, wouldn't it?
Jonathan was DJing there.
That's right, yeah, and Master Scratch, who I later met in a taxi one night home from Rock City, which was from Venus. But anyway, so yeah, I went through the whole breakdancing thing. And then I remember buying Crush, House Arrest, and I didn't know what I was listening to, but was addicted to it. Couldn't stop playing it. Went to Kos when I was like 16, late 16s, and got taken. But I can remember the Yaz song was my memory. Came back, had read all about, and then started to realise there was references in that to a guy that was playing in Nottingham, Graham Park, and to what was then the Garage. Yes. So a year later. This is a really complex story, Andy. I'll try and get to the point. But
take your time. We've got all the time you need.
I will go off on tangents. Somebody was from a local. I lived in quite a village environment outside Nottingham. I wasn't like a born and bred city dweller, but somebody from a local village was quite a big noise in Nottingham in terms of he run hairdressing, he run clothes shops, and he was a pseudo promoter at the same time as James. And the job came up in his hairdressing.
It's Ashley Walters.
Yeah, am I allowed to name people? I didn't know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Ashley.
Well, yeah. Ashley, but and I strategically took a job at the hairdressers, knowing that he was like the guy at the time, and I would get involved with him and all the people I was seeing, or knew about, were going to the clubs like the Garage. And my first clubbing experience, how privileged was I, was going to the Garage when I was like 17 with Graham Park on a Saturday night, and that was my baptism of fire into clubland. And that's how I got into clubbing. I started through Ashley at the hairdresser, started buying records, starting to want to emulate Graham. He was my hero. And then just got a couple of opportunities through local parties. The Duck Call, which was like...
Yeah, Duck Call,
Yeah, the Duck Call was like I think it was like a Nottingham equivalent of Boyzone. It was like a fanzine rag type. They put a few gigs on. And then I found myself playing.
Was that Jag and the boys?
Yeah, Stephanie and Matthew, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Ended up playing with Graham Park, which was like unbelievable. I weren't very good. And then through that, eventually and there's a whole story there, got brought into the Venus arena when at the time I think it was seen that my music fitted what they were trying to do. But it wasn't a great story what happened there, if I'm honest.
Okay, not something you'd like to elaborate on?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I don't know if I'm jumping straight in, but...
No, go for it, because as I say, before you get into the story, let me just say again, I can see a lot of people have recently joined us. Please do feel free to comment, guys. Please do feel free to draw any reference to anything that Christian and Sam are saying. I'll say good evening to Andrea, to Chris, to the two Chris's, to Emily as well. So, guys, do feel free. leave your name in the chat and let me say hi to you when there's a break in the conversation. Okay, all yours,
Am I
Christian.
rambling?
No, please.
No.
Trust me, if you're rambling, I'll be the first to interrupt. Otherwise, I'll sit
Please-
here. You've got all
do.
night.
No, so we'll try and make it succinct but honest. I basically was working in hairdressers above a very famous record shop called Select Disc in Nottingham. And at the time, the guy I was working for, Ashley, was putting on nights at Venus before it really exploded. It was the first couple of months.
Yes.
He did a night called Boil Wash. Do you remember this, Sam? He did a night. You remember the night called Boil Wash?
Wow.
He was already trying to tap into the kind of London sect, I think, because there was a lot going on with the Flying Crew and Charlie Chester and his lot. So he did a night called Boil Wash, and for his artistic merits, he decided to put empty washing machines all over the club.
Yeah.
Don't ask, but anyway.
Yeah.
So he was doing that. I was doing the duck call. Venus was already gathering pace. I think the flying parties there really kick-started it. But so you had, as Sam said, and you alluded to, Andy, upstairs, which was, I think, Tim and Laurie from the very beginning, Sam, from what?
Yes, it was, yes.
And then downstairs you had Paul Wayne, who worked in Select Disc, the record shop, and DJ Sai, who was an incredible DJ and obviously remains an incredible DJ. And I think from my memory, they were playing half an hour of Paul and half an hour of DJ Sai, on and off, back to back. Now, Paul comes from he comes from an indie background. It's probably the best way I can describe it. He probably will tell me different, but he came from a very indie background, which was quite the vogue at that time. You know, the Happy Mondays, the sort of slower pace. Yeah. So he was right on the money. DJ Sai was much more driving. I'm not going to say hardcore, but he was upbeat, and I think there was a real kind of juxtaposition going on between those two.
Yes.
And I think what happened in time was a few people got the ear of James and said, this isn't quite right for the moment, even though I think everyone recognised Sai was an amazing DJ, good friends with Paul. And a few people put my name in the ear of James, cut to the chase, and I was put in place of DJ Sai.
Well, let me pause you there then.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us that. I am going to be quite happy to skip backwards and forwards if necessary. Okay. So it's all good. You tell us whatever springs to mind as it comes in. But we have really got ahead of ourselves, Sam, really, because I wanna understand about how the club decided to get the identity, some of the next little steps that got you hooked up with the likes of the Flying Crew and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, I mean, as Christian was saying, we started Venus and we launched it. It was a complete different clientele that I was used to. We used to aim at the club. We used to have clientele that was, we hoped for more smarter dress, a smart dress policy. That was the idea for the club, even though people were sometimes quite casually dressed, but then a good, strong door policy. When James came along and said, we're going to do this night called Venus, we were used to paying a DJ a weekly wage, and he was playing 4 nights a week, probably the same sort of music every night. A guy called John, lovely guy. But then James said, well, I've got these guest DJs, and we probably have about 3 or 4 DJs per night, and I'm responsible for paying these wages. So when I was paying one DJ for 4 nights a week, a certain amount of money, suddenly I'm paying the same amount for one DJ per evening. Mm-hmm. So I was finding this a little bit sort of strange that I'm paying out all this money, but we did increase the door charge, which obviously slightly compensated for it. But at first, it was a bit of a sort of amazing change, or a drastic change from what I was used to and what James brought on board.
Mm-hmm. So can I ask you, if I may, please, tell me, this is your story, but tell me a little bit about James, because I don't really know much about James. He's an infamous character, but tell me a little bit about his background. James
came to Nottingham because he was working down the pit.
Okay.
He came from a small town in Scotland for work, working down the pit. But again, he was into fashion. I think his wife, bless her, had a clothes shop. So he was quite a fashionable guy, and he had connections in London. And so when James when I first heard of James, he was doing a bar, a really cool bar just outside the city of Nottingham, just out of town centre. And he created this real buzz about what he was doing, the sort of music that was coming, he was playing, and the sort of people that was attracting. I do think there was some added element that sort of helped the music sound amazing. And having gone to one of James's club nights, I walked in and saw this crazy atmosphere and thought, oh my God, I need to have this. Not realizing at the time there were some additional things that helped the atmosphere. But anyway, I invited James along, and we discussed the changes, the policies, all those sort of things. But James was on the ball. He knew about music policy, he knew about fashion, way ahead of what I was thinking. I was still a little bit behind on that sort of scene. But James was a clever guy, and so we created this night, Venus.
Right. So let's get back to the point where you were talking about the discrepancy, the difference, the disparity in the wages.
Right. So from memory, I would probably pay a DJ £200 a week to DJ for 4 nights a week, 4 or 5 nights a week. James would have the guest DJs on, and I'll be paying that one DJ £200 for the night. And we were doing this 3-4 nights a week. So the DJ wages were so much more than I expected. But I have to admit, the club nights were getting busier and busier and busier. So for all the additional costs, I could see the reasons behind it, because these DJs were attracting an audience which I hadn't seen before. Very fashionable, trendy. I remember being on the door once, and a guy turned up, or some guys turned up with their shirts hanging over their trousers.
Wow!
And I turned them away, saying, "Gentlemen, you put your shirts in." Now, I didn't realise that was a fashion statement. So having spoken to James, I said, "No, Sam, this is the way people dress. You need to allow them in." So I did step back and allow them to start coming in, and then realised there was a transition of people coming through the door that were not coming to the club, and then having to turn the people that come to the club before away because they didn't fit in with what we were trying to do. So it was quite interesting, the change of clientele, and also having the door policy that was quite strict, but in a more casual way than someone arriving in a suit would say, "Sorry, you can't come in, sir, because you're overdressed."
Okay, so am I getting ahead of myself with this? Because I do know that you had the DIY guys involved at some of the parties. Was that much later or around the same time? Because they weren't particularly the most well dressed.
What we did is on Venus, we had a strong Saturday night, and then we had a sort of rotation on the Friday of guest nights. So we'd have DIY, we'd have the fly-in, we'd have some guys from Manchester. I don't remember quite so much now. We used to do a night there.
Most excellent.
Yeah, most excellent. Then we had Steve from London. He did
Steve Proctor, Better Days.
Better Days.
Yeah.
So we had sort of 4 or 5 rotating Fridays.
So these were all Fridays. Okay.
Yeah, always on Friday. And then the flying thing was the biggest night that we used to sort of have, because they have 4 or 5 coaches come from London. And
can I just pick up on that, Sam? And we've talked about memories, but I think when James came in, I think he knew exactly what he wanted to do with the club. He had the idea. He was tapped into the London idea, the sense of cool, the music, the fashion. Yeah. I think he struggled. If I don't know if you agree, he struggled for a couple of, maybe a month or 2.
Yes.
The first flying was like when not only did he bring bucket loads of Londoners up, but also a lot of locals went, and it was like an epiphany. It was like, right, this is what the club is. And that was really the kind of what launched it to the locals, that this is what the club is about.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, I was getting ahead of myself. And you were right. It took about a month or so before the club actually, Venus started to kick in.
So we're talking late, talking the summer of 90, 91.
It would have been in the 90s, yes, because we kicked off in May. So throughout the summer, Then we were doing, I think Ashley was started doing his bank holiday nights.
Yeah, the Midland
very
night.
strong.
Yeah.
And there was some student nights that kicked in on a sort of Tuesday night. I think there was a guy called Pete that used to do a Tuesday night. So the students started catching on. So it kind of grew. Over a few months, it started to pick up and then established itself.
Okay. So where was it the connections with the London guys that then made you the darlings of the press that got you the nationwide coverage?
I think definitely the London guys helped. Obviously, Dan Prince started to come along. Obviously, it was Mix Mag. And then we managed to get DJs to DJ at the club that probably wouldn't have DJed there before, like there we go. Memory's gone now. But you name some DJs from back in the day that started the whole scene.
What, like Oakenfold or Sasha?
Oakenfold played, that's right. Yeah. Oakenfold was what came and played. And then there was Shoom. The guys Ramplin, yes. Yeah. When they started to play at the club, then people started to recognise it. The Venus has established itself. That's when it really started happening.
I think it also built. I think there was such a London, Nottingham, Manchester connection as well, with the likes of Justin Robertson and Greg Fenton with the most excellent. They were coming in on the week bank holidays with the flying crew. It was like a perfect storm in terms of media exposure. Is the Manchester people talking about it, the London people talking about it, and all three brands coming together regularly to put on these bank holidays.
Let's not forget the 012 ones. Let's not forget the 012 ones.
So now it's interesting. So when it comes to the guys like Lee, Mick, Jim, and Dermot, obviously from Money Pennies or Chuff Chuffs they were doing before, little boat parties on the River Severn, I think in Worcester. They used to come down quite regularly. And what happened is that I lost my license to run the club, myself and Steve, the owner, because we were caught for overcrowding. So I was a personal licensee at the club. We had the police outside the back and the front counting people coming out. We were licensed for 500 people. They counted out about 800 people. So I lost my license. So I wasn't allowed to work there anymore. So that's getting into 91, beginning of 92. And then I was asked to go and do Miss Moneypennies. So that's how the boys started to get involved with Venus and then doing their Moneypennies and Chuff Chuff tours.
Okay. Right. Okay. That's that connection there. Christian, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just want to say good evening to Andrea. Hi to Jimmy. Someone is chuckling at one of the comments that you made earlier, where we were skirting around a certain topic. Good evening, John, Mr. Rogers. How are you, and everybody else with us? We've got a crazy load of people watching on YouTube, which is nice to see.
Just ask, because I don't want to touch on certain subjects, and I don't want to emphasise that things were important in that era to.
Listen, as far as I'm concerned, unless you don't want to discuss anything because of people watching, you can say whatever you want. There's no problem to talk about anything on this show.
Yes. Well, I do believe that there was a certain element and that was obviously shared amongst lots of people in the club, which gave them a big high. And that certainly did add to the atmosphere.
That was just the culture, wasn't it, Christian? From 88, that was the UK.
That wasn't unique to Venus, but it stood out for lots of other reasons. You can't ignore it. Yeah,
it showed. I've seen the change of atmosphere at the club to the atmosphere in Venus, because of this additional sort of thing that came along. It was my first experience of seeing that, because prior to that, I'd heard stories about people going clubbing and they'd taken this and they'd taken that, and I didn't quite understand it because I was not a part of that sort of scene. So I could see the massive difference, and the atmosphere used to be amazing. It gave me the impetus to keep going and working in the club industry, because at that stage I was looking to leave it because I was getting bored.
You're getting a little bit bored. So the energy of everybody else, not you getting involved yourself.
That's right. Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to come back and talk to you more about the running of the establishment, the setup, the door policy. Christian, I want to focus, if I may, on yourself as a DJ. Please bask in the glory of being one of the finest DJs known for the more sweeter, soulful sound. Tell us about your DJ style. Tell us about the music you used to love. Tell us about the following that you attained.
You can keep going if you want, because I love it. I wouldn't. Yeah. Like I said, I think I joined Venus when there was the musical trend was the kind of slower. I'm going to branch it. I'm going to sort of bucket it all under the Weatherall sound or whatever went on to Pioneer. Yeah. My background was, whilst Psy was superb, and that was an awkward thing that happened there. I was by no means up to his standard, but I was seen as a better fit musically. There was still a little bit of a juxtaposition with me and Paul because I came from a kind of Graham Park background. So I had been educated in the kind of the US sound, the garage, the true garage, the kind of New Jersey sound and a little bit Detroit. Paul definitely was coming from an indie background, but obviously had a leaning towards the house sound and whatever. So it was not abrasive, but it was different. And I think that worked. I think that worked in many ways. But I still say I think my love of house music comes from the electro, from the kind of program beats kind of background. But there's definitely a bit of me that loves the kind of rhythm, the melody, the disco, all of that. I think that's my grounding, to be honest.
I get you. So my wife is jumping into the chat. She's saying, I'm sure I saw a man called Adam downstairs at Venus. Andrea says she saw Saint Etienne at Venus. Now, as you guys both know, I shared with you a photo of my membership card. We went to Venus quite a few times. I've got zero recollection of anything. The only thing I can remember is walking through the shopping centre where we used to park the car. You used to have to walk through the shopping centre. Being stood in the queue, shitting ourselves that whether we were going to get in or not. We never got turned away. And one record was Don Pablos Animals, the Venus record. I remember that getting played there. That's my only recollection of Venus, and I went a fair few times. So tell me about when you used to get onto the decks then, Christian, and how you'd play and how the crowd would react.
I'm going to be as honest. I was I'm going to try and phrase it as an over keen or over enthusiastic youngster, thinking that he was the next big thing.
Okay.
If I had to put it another way, I was probably just a bit cocky and a bit arrogant. But I love what I did. I genuinely love what I did. I loved the idea of being able to mix. I like the technicality of it. I loved putting it out there. There's a level of endorphin, this power, isn't there? It's you can't hide that. You can't say a DJ doesn't enjoy that level of feedback from what they do. All of that for a 18-year-old. I probably was an absolute nightmare, to be honest. But I love what I did. I had a real genuine, I couldn't wait. I would practice all week. I couldn't wait to get the next record. Everything. There was nothing but passion for what I did. Probably sometimes with some naivety at the cost of relationships or people or other things going on. But I think I'd like to think I played a part in it, but I think I was a sum of all the parts. I think Tim and Laurie were they were the heartbeat of it upstairs. Paul brought with it the perfect music background at the perfect time and a level head and no shortage of passion. I'm not saying that, but Paul was very real. He just loved music and wanted to play music and educate. I wanted to be a DJ, and I think there was a sort of difference. Does that make sense?
Out of all of the names that you mentioned before, you were the only one who really kind of started to forge a name for yourself, who would appear regularly in all the magazines, would be talked about a hell of a lot. How did that come about? You're just a good blagger or what?
No, you know what? You could ask me that. I don't really know how it came out. I know that Paul managed to play a couple of times at Flying in London. He was on the transfer market with James for whatever. I still had connections with the guys so I talked about the Duck Call, which was a Nottingham fanzine akin to what is probably now Faith or they're our equivalent of Boys Own. The person behind that, or the people behind that, included Matthew Collins, the writer and editor, and his partner then Stephanie, who was my manager. And she was, can't even remember how that came about, but she wanted to manage me. So she was getting me in at Full Circle I played the first ever Back to Basics when it was like just that little place on Briggate. It just seemed to evolve. And I think if I'm totally honest, there was a little bit of conflict with James. I've got to be completely honest. I think James was managing Paul more than managing me, which was fine. But I was obviously starting to get work out, and it was starting to sometimes impact on my Saturdays at Venus. So, but I never wanted to lose that. I realised, I think, above all else, I realised what a special place that was and what it'd done. But I was starting to get interest from other places. So it sort of grew organically, which sounds crap, but that's really what sort of happened.
So will this take us into 91, 92, or are we still the back end of 1990?
This is probably more into 90. Bear in mind, I was only at the club for, Sam's going to correct me here, for about a year and a half, I think.
Yes, that'd be about right. And don't forget, Venus continued after my depart because of a good friend of ours took over the licensing and managed the club. So some of the Money Pens and Chuff Chuff tours at Venus were after my time.
Okay.
And the name of Venus was still going strong, and I was actually then becoming a customer of the club more than obviously after working there. But yeah, just a year and a half you were doing Venus.
Yeah, and I think this sounds really trite what I'm about to say, but it links in with what Sam said. I think Venus ran for a good few years, but I think there was a year, and in no way coincidental to what I just said, there was a year when, from the flying thing, when it was really like the intensity of it was incredible.
Yes,
it was beyond. And I still look back, and people still tell me that Venus was actually the real start of guest DJs. I know in other genres and there'd been a touch of that, but from the flying thing to James's tenacity to book people to come in, it was the real start of that kind of traveling DJ, paid big wages kind of culture.
I agree. Yeah, those bringing those nights in and bringing those DJs to Nottingham. Everybody had the chance to see DJs they probably wouldn't see in other cities because they're all playing in Nottingham. And I mean, I used to stand on the door, and obviously I'm renowned for this awful doorman that used to knock people back and not let people in and be very picky. But I just wanted to make sure that the people in the club were the right people in the club. So a lot of people didn't get in. Obviously, the club could only hold a certain amount of people. But I used to look down outside and look at the queue and go, my God, people are traveling from all over the place to get here. And I was just amazed by it. And it really was for me I was in my 30s then. These kids were coming along. They were, since I found out, were 15, 16, 17 and managed to get in. So I was in my 30s, way past, I thought, that those clubbing days.
I remember driving around the corner, Sam, once with my dad, who was, bless his soul, he was from the valleys in Wales. He didn't really understand what he wanted me to get a proper job. I'd gone into fashion design and then hairdressing and then DJ, and he started to question certain things. Anyway, I remember him driving around Stamford Street one night when I asked him to take me in, and he just couldn't believe what he saw was actually for the club. It was like 4 deep all the way up. You hear these stories all the time, but that was quite exceptional in those days. There was literally queues over 2 streets, and he just couldn't get his head around it.
The venue was a very popular venue going back years before, because before originally it was called the Dungeon. And that's got a good following, strong following. Even still now they have reunions. And the Dungeon was an established venue. Then it became, I think, a place called the Asylum, which was also very popular.
Probably more appropriate.
And then I think at one stage it was a gay club. And then Stephen Phil, the owners, took over and named it the club. So the venue itself was well renowned throughout the city, but also outside the city. That venue was a good venue to attend. Venus added to that reputation.
Let me ask you from a crowd point of view. I threw back earlier mentioning the likes of Rock City, the infamous All Dayers. That was very much more a hip hop into the beginnings of the house crowd, but as towards the back end of the 80s, or the middle to the end of the 80s, as the house scene automatically progressed from that. did you ever get an overspill of that crowd wanting to come to Venus, or was that never ever really an issue?
I think there was maybe a smattering of that sort of crowds coming along, but not really. I don't think we really got that many. If you're into breakdancing and hip hop, you might have come to Venus because it was different from the standard nightclubs that were in the city playing the general sort of disco or top of the pops type of music.
Yeah.
I didn't sort of see those people. The thing is that Venus attracted certain people that were dressed so outrageously sometimes. I didn't know where they'd come from. The more outrageous, the better.
Yeah.
And the more stylish. And obviously, certain fashion labels were important. Like I think John Richmond was a big one back then. And there were some Japanese labels that were really big. So I didn't really sort of pick up on where they were coming from or what sort of music background they had. It was just a really fresh, young, vibrant, very interesting crowd. So
can I pick up on that, Andy? Because I think what I seem to forget is that same time as Venus was in its ascendance, you had what was the garage of Graham Park.
Yes.
And then you had Graham sort of realised that he couldn't run. He was doing the Hacienda Friday and the garage on Saturday, which was a big coup for Nottingham. The wonderful, talented Alistair Whitehead sort of was his understudy and sort of took over when Graham literally, I think, drifted away on Saturdays. And you had these two camps to a degree. You had what was then the garage was rebranded the Cool Cat. The Cool Cat was a real Nottingham club, a cool Nottingham club.
Absolutely.
Probably the kind of crowd you were talking about that had grown through. Venus, I think, originally was a bit of a people in Nottingham. My experience saw it as a bit of a novelty, even though it wasn't. It was like a novelty, new thing with predominantly a lot of people travelling to it. And I don't think at first the Nottingham people took, with the exception of quite a core crowd, they didn't quite buy into it at first until the Fly and Do, and then a few probably club nights after. And eventually you had this migration that it started to fill with more locals, but there was a limited capacity and there were still a lot of people travelling. So whilst it was in Nottingham, it was definitely had Nottingham people in it, there was still this other camp of people that were going to what was the garage or the Cool Cat.
That's right, the Cool Cat. And then James had a bar initially. Again, the name Papa Bins, that had that sort of crowd that would go to the Cool Cat afterwards because it was a bar and it closed, and the next thing was going to a club. And I think that was the sort of crowd that sort of filtered through Papa Bins to the Cool Cat, and then they migrated slowly to Venus. I think Cool Cat, either it closed, I don't know what happened, but
I can't remember. It was still, it was a massive part of Nottingham pre-Venus. It was like the acid house hit through Graham and all of that.
Yeah.
Venus then just came in as this kind of all singing, dancing, and it needed it. But I think a lot of people had a bit of resistance to it because they'd gone through that formative house wave being at the garage and with Graham Park and all that sort of thing.
So Venus was always seen as, I remember it as always being extremely credible indeed with the names that you mentioned to begin with that James was involved with, or, all the guys down in London. Do you recall it ever getting to a point where it became a little bit kind of cliche, and it was starting to then you look around and you think, what's going on here? I mean, you would have been long gone by then, Sam, right?
Yes, I'd moved on. Venus was still going, but then I'd moved on to work with the Ryan brothers and the Lee Garrick when they formed Moneypennies at Bonds in Birmingham. That was probably about 92. So I'd moved on. Venus was still going, but then when I went to work at Moneypennies, it was a different crowd again, because the Birmingham people seemed to want to dress a little bit smarter and more fashionable. I don't know, fashionable is the wrong word, but more sort of glamorous. And Moneypennies sort of kicked off, and then they would do tours at Venus, and then Chuff Chuff was obviously a big thing on the boat, and then obviously we did the big stately homes. So I'd gone from Venus back in 92, so I wasn't sure what was going on because I was already working in Birmingham at the time. But
Christian,
I think I was pretty much the same. I think for whatever reason, I think I'd eventually gone, or taken the decision to go, or was taken for me. But I moved on to, like you say, I started to go on the guest circuit.
Yeah.
I think what Venus was a bit of a launch pad for, if you think about the late 89, you know, we went through the kind of rave era of dressing down and going to, and then it was forced back into clubs effectively. And it was still in the kind of dressing down stage a little bit. And I think the garage was a little bit of that. I think what Venus became is this kind of new explosion of, let's get dressed up again. Let's go, let's enjoy it being in a club with the same soundtrack and whatever accompaniments that go with it. It was like the blueprint to many other clubs. I'm not going to say it takes credit for Money Pennies or any other club.
That's all down to Sam, though, making everyone took the shirt in.
Yes. Yeah, took your shirt in.
It's all your fault, mate.
Yes. Yeah, it was, when I look back at that now, I just find it so funny that I was turning, and obviously I started then wearing my shirt outside of my trousers.
You crazy kid.
Crazy guy, yeah.
Push the boat out. So,
yeah. And obviously remember Hacienda was the big band in Manchester. And some of my friends used to go there, and I think Hacienda became such a busy club, and obviously had that sort of gangster element. People started to move away from it, and then we had this sort of a little bit of a gay influence as well with Venus, which I think helped, because a lot of people used to come there and feel comfortable. There wasn't any sort of towny element coming in and being abusive and creating issues. So it was a safe place.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, so then we had spoken just before Sam came on, Christian, about the DJ agency that spawned from the club, that's kind of connected, but yet also not connected.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things spawned from the club, that not just us, but one of them being two of the girls that worked there were basically approached. I'm not taking credit again, but they did approach me to sound me. Obviously, at that point, to your early conversation, Andy, I was starting to get guest slots, not in any kind of gravitas, but I was playing away, and they were sort of saying, you know, are you being represented? And I was like, I have agents. There are agents that are booking DJs. It's like a new thing. You know, there's money to be made from many of them who were just concert promoters. We're now seeing the gap in the market. So a lady called Jane and Catherine basically said, we'd like to do something like that, but using the Venus name. So make Venus the DJ agency, and had my full support, but I wasn't sort of instrumental in it happening. I was just a conversation person. I think they went to Steve at the time, Sam, and got permission to use the brand.
Yeah, Steve Kirk allowed the girls to use the name Venus. Obviously, it was quite a strong name at the time, and they created a good little agency, definitely.
And they had good picking ground, because they had some Nottingham talent. Already, you know, they had Alistair, they had a wonderful up and coming DJ called Angel, also from Nottingham. Yeah. But also they had a line straight into some of the biggest people in Clubland who were coming to Venus, so they could make their approaches through the club, and I think quite quickly it grew, and became probably one of the most credible agencies for a period.
Most
definitely.
definitely.
The history that went on beyond that.
I remember Patrick Smooth was on their books, as was
Les Patrick,
Andy Roberts. I remember going up the motorway with Patrick to meet the girls, asking if I could get on to Venus's books, and they said, "Well, Andy, you know, you're not quite right yet. Maybe see if you can get onto the radio or something."
Right.
And that gave me the kick up the ass that I needed. I went back, and you know, eventually they did take me on and started getting me some gigs. It was very
so Andy, were you playing along at the same time as Patrick, or did you come along after Patrick?
Patrick was already established just before me. I started DJing 1991, 92. Patrick had been already playing for a while, and he was already quite established. Okay. As you know, Patrick, he's got the gift of the gab. He talked himself into a lot of great situations, and of course he could back it up with great music and great talent. And then eventually I would watch Patrick from afar, sort of slightly envious and, you know, in awe of what he did. And then we would become really good friends. He kind of took me under his wing, started taking me down to London, took me over to Miami, got me in with the likes of Bobby and Steve at Garage City and you know, stuff like that. And then it eventually, my own hard work and my own gift of the gab would eventually get me onto the radio and so on and so forth. But yeah, Patrick, I'll always give him praise for being the man, you know.
Yeah. I bumped into Patrick at Rob Farrell's 50th birthday in Birmingham a few years back, and just after he had his accident, bless him. It was, I think
2 years ago, 2 years this week. Yeah. That was.
He DJ'd at that event, but you could see he was struggling. I haven't seen him since then, so if you've heard from him.
Yeah, I've spoken to him. He's in a very good place now. He's in a very, very good place. A lot of love for Patrick. Let me just say hi to Christopher Barron. He's saying flying up Venus was some of the best days ever. Steve Reed was commenting, talking about Rock City and Cass Rock. Cass and Alistair actually are two guys that eventually I am going to bring on because they've got their own stories to tell. So what other gaps are we missing from this important story? Because I feel we may have raced through this for fear of not wanting to talk about too much, but I'm sure there must be other things that were quite important.
I do know the Venus obviously established itself, and then they started. I think they did some events in Italy with Justin Robertson, with the Flying Guys. They started to take Venus started to go on tour, and spread the word. So yeah, there was. Obviously, I don't remember too much about what happened, but
I've got a memory.
Go ahead.
I remember Venus in Paris, and the only I think there was. Do you remember Sly and Love Child, the band?
Yes, absolutely.
And Dan Prince was there. Yeah. Ball. And my only memory has been pushed around Paris at 4 a.m. in a wheelie bin. That's the only thing I can't tell you anything. I can't tell you anything about the club. I genuinely can't. I can't tell you anything about how well. I know Laurent Garnier was playing, which was incredible. But all I remember, nothing about that. I just remember being pushed around Paris streets in a wheelie bin.
Yeah,
that's not much of a story, is it? Really?
Representing Nottingham.
Have you partaked? Have you had something to give you that sort of?
No, I was just drunk, Sam.
Okay, just drunk. Okay.
Come on.
Wonderful.
My mum might be watching.
So I guess we should, everyone knows the story of how the 90s would have progressed and it would have gone so crazy. How long did you remain working the doors and the like, Sam? What was the natural progression for you?
Right. So from Venus, I went to work at Moneypenny's, and I was there to try and establish a similar crowd or a nice crowd for those guys, because they wanted somebody kind of knew the crowd. Obviously, a lot of people were traveling from Birmingham to Venus, so I knew a lot of people prior to working there would travel from all the different cities. So I was working at Moneypenny's as the guy that picks the crowd, who was saying yes and no to people, supported by 3-4 burly doormen. So just in case I was sort of abused or attacked.
Shout out to Beaver if he's watching.
Yeah, Beaver. Yeah. There you go. So, and what it was, I went to the Ryan brothers invited me to a party on the River Severn of Worcester, a little boat party called Chuff Chuff. It was the most amazing place. Can you believe it? Floating down the river, and everybody's dancing and enjoying themselves in this very, very small, compact space. And then they said to me, "We're thinking about doing a club night." And I said, "Okay." And we're thinking about asking you to come and do the door. I'm fine. Okay. But I'm not a doorman. I said, I'm happy to pick, choose, and do the guest list. That was the plan. So I was happy to do that. And that sort of continued my sort of role in working for clubs on the door. Mm-hmm. And I think for most people, they always say, thought I was the doorman, which I was, and as I did make decisions about who came in. But that became my reputation as Sam on the door.
But Sam the door whore.
For many, many years, I was
on the door.
Yeah. I was managing venues all over Nottingham as a licensee. I'd run clubs, I'd run pubs, I'd run restaurants. But I was enjoying the kind of crowd and kind of music that was being played at these clubs. So the natural transition from Venus was to Moneypenny's, and then Moneypenny's we started doing Chuff Chuffs at stately homes. But I was all about the crowd, mm-hmm. and people attending.
So how long?
I'm just excited about it.
How long did that last for?
Well, I think for Moneypennies, I became their tour manager for the next sort of 7 years. After that, we were doing tours in different cities, different countries. Obviously, we did Ibiza. It's a lovely venue. By inviting the port, it was amazing. El Divino, it was called. So for about 7 years, I was running all over the country, managing nights in different cities and different countries. It was amazing.
Well, Jeff Jefferson will know all about that. I'm sure he was with you on many of them.
Definitely.
Did you? Were you involved in that legendary Tel Aviv party?
No, not me. No, I don't know what story went down then, but no, I certainly wasn't.
You were very quick to say no.
Wow, what do you know?
Definitely not. Yes, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Good evening, Sherry. Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right then. So, Christian, any next parts of the story? Tell us how your DJ career flourished.
I could tell you one of my biggest regrets, which I got booked for the first ever Chuff Chuff Bow party on Boxing Day, I think it was, and I couldn't drive, so I was hugely dependent on friends. And I remember ringing, I think it was Jim, and saying I can't, and he wasn't happy, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't realize I'd let him down, so never played for them again. Big mistake, huge mistake. But it was genuine. I couldn't get there. But in terms of, I think one of the biggest, I've got Birmingham to thank for one of the biggest things in my career. I went to play at the Dome. Is that still there, the Dome?
It is, but I think it's called the O2 Academy now.
Of course, yeah. Oh. And I was booked to play with CJ McIntosh, who was one of my, a mixing
great DJ.
Yeah. Who at the time was with Lynn Cosgrave, who was then fundamental in BMG and the Ministry. And it was empty. It was completely empty. But we were playing, and I'll never forget, she came up and said, I've not met you, but Chris plays some of your tapes in the car. And I literally nearly hit the deck. And, I was a young, cocky, confident, but also over-eager person. But to hear that he was playing my tapes, and that was when sort of I was launched into doing the Ministry. That was when she basically got me to play at the Ministry every month for literally nothing. But that's the way the Ministry rolls. And that sort of then was a bit of a springboard to get, I got into Southport, I got into many other clubs.
And then your ego went through the roof.
Oh, can you imagine? I was an arsehole, let's be honest.
I became.
Don't second that.
No, I wasn't. I was about to say I became Christian's driver for a while.
Of course, I forgot about that.
Christian couldn't drive, so he'd be getting these gigs all over these different clubs across the country, and I was driving him around.
Can I tell him the story, Sam, about the watch? No, probably not.
Well, I don't know what story about the watch.
So you said one of the most insightful lines I've ever heard, and Andy, I'm sure this will resonate with you. Went to a club, I think it was in Torquay or somewhere. When every club, every town had a club with guest DJs, and we turned up, and it was probably not even half empty, not even half full. Sorry, it was half empty. And towards the end of the night, it was clear that this is not what they expected, and the promoter came to, I think, to you, Sam, and said, well, it's not very busy. Can we pay, X percentage? And you said, if it was busier than you expected, would you pay any more for the DJ? And I just thought, what a genius piece of information that was, is that was the culture then is, we're going to pay you when you get there, but they didn't account for, they would actually have to pay you.
Yes. Yeah. I remember those. And quite often I traveled.
I didn't tell them the watch story, but there you go. Well, you think you actually said, "Well, I'll give you the money. I'll have your watch, and then when you come back, I'll give you a watch back." And it was
right. So I did that. So I travelled with Alistair for quite some time as well, across the country, and it's quite interesting because I became a promoter sometime later, and one of my first gigs I did was a bar called Brown's, and I've been going to the Milk Bar in London on a Monday night and listening to Darren Emerson, who I thought was amazing. So I did a gig. It was Jim Shafarian, Alistair Whitehead, Angel, and Darren Emerson. And I was Reliant, and I was expected to be very busy. And at that time, it was a day party. So people that were coming in didn't know what to expect. And it wasn't busy enough to have made money, but it's just about enough to pay everybody. And it was the most embarrassing thing, because I remember saying to Jim and Darren, can you take a reduced rate? Against
the irony of it.
Against what I believe in, I was asking them to take less money because it wasn't as busy as I thought it would be. But the fact is that I used to say that often to promoters, you can't pay them less because it's quiet, unless you're going to pay them more when it's really busy.
It's busier.
It usually won the argument most times. But as a promoter, you suddenly start to believe in the booking the right DJs. You think you'd get a club full, and that wasn't always the case.
And that was the culture. I think that was what there sort of was like an implosion, wasn't there, when it became so saturated.
Yeah.
There was so, you know, I look across people at my level in the league, whatever you want to call it, you know, we certainly weren't the top of it, but we were getting regular work. But you were just on this circuit, and it was like the mid-level, and every, you know, some of the places you went, you know, they were just thinking, well, I'll book that, I'll put a name on.
Yes.
There was no thought beyond that. They just assumed they would make money. They would, and not every DJ can pull in those kind of crowds. You know,
no.
That was a fact of life, I think.
I was traveling a lot with Sasha back in the day. Sasha was obviously this big name. I think Sasha was doing a lot of gigs at Venus. Then he became so popular. Then I think that's when DJ Sai came back and became a resident at Venus. But Sasha was killing it everywhere. But there was that many parties going on. So there'd be a party in the evening, but there'd be a party in the daytime, and there was a party in the morning. So we would go and do 3 gigs in one day, and the morning party wasn't as busy, understandably, and then the afternoon party would get busier. Then by the night time, it was really busy. But the adulation he used to get when he was traveling, we were traveling around, it was, I mean, ridiculous, and so much fun.
Legendary status. I mean, he was the first superstar DJ, really, for many of us.
Exactly.
I got a story about him as well.
Go on.
And this will remain with me for what a decent, nice guy. What, you know, he was really on the crest of that wave when he started playing at Venus. You know, as you said, Andy, he was really hitting the front cover of which was unheard of as a DJ, standard, like a, you know. And he came to Venus, and the record I really wanted, that you literally, can you remember the days when you couldn't get records?
Yeah.
Wow.
Which was Denise Lopez, Don't You Want to Be Mine? There was a dub of that, and it was only available on promo on A&M. And he played it, and I told him, I said, you know, oh, this is an amazing record. You know, I'd love this. The next time he came back, which was only a month later, the first thing he did is walk over and gave me a copy, and he said, I got it from the DMC office in the US for you. He'd remembered. And I was just a lowly resident DJ, you know, I was just overly eager, as I've told you. But no, he just remembered, he'd done it. There was total humility, and I just thought, wow, you know, he could have been losing his head at that time. I'm sure he maybe went on to do so, but at that point, he was just a great guy.
Yeah, I did a lot of traveling with Angel as well, because Angel, from being a resident at the Venus Club, then starting to get, I mean, it was Christian and Angel that seemed to get in more of the gigs, guest slots at different clubs across the country. So I was also not the driver for Angel, but we travelled together, because when she travel up to all these various cities, a female, she didn't travel on her own, so I would travel with her. And again, it was a great experience going to all these different clubs, all these small towns. I mean, I remember going to Latvia in the winter when the snow was everywhere, and she played at this club that was basically a lap dancing club, and we were given dinner served by scantily dressed ladies. It was
sounds terrible.
Sorry,
sounds terrible.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so it wasn't. It was just that those experiences of going to these faraway countries and these small cities. It was back in those days. It was excellent times and great fun. But just getting to see these different clubs in different cities was, because there was a club in every city that was during the night. It was. I mean, fantastic times in the 90s, going into 2000. I'll never forget them. Never forget them.
Well, let's start bringing it back to home turf. Let's start bringing it back to Nottingham. You mentioned, Sam, that you started to do other gigs then, other promotions. Is that what you're still doing now? Tell me what life is like at the moment for you.
So I wasn't really interested in promoting sort of 10, 20 years ago. But then I remember Tim and Laurie did a couple of, no, tell a lie. Venus had shut and gone. But then James decided to do a big reunion in a couple of bars in an area called Hockley. So you'd come along. I don't think it was a charge for on the night, but you could go into 2-3 different bars and have all the residents playing. And I think it was a guest DJs playing as well. And it was mobbed. It was amazing. And from that spin-off from that, I think Tim and Laurie did a couple of free Venus parties that went pretty okay. And then Venus sort of disappeared. And then by chance, a friend of mine, or friends of mine, owned a lovely bar called Riverbank by the Trent Bridge. And they were doing their what's called pop-up parties and playing that sort of nice, dancey, vocal house music. People were coming. And I suggested maybe we should do a Venus reunion. And so we did that. I think it was 2020. No, sorry. It was the 30th anniversary, so could have been 2020. No, that can't be right.
That was the first pandemic, so would a couple of years before the first pandemic.
Well before that. I think it was probably the 20th. I don't know. I tell you, it was 25th anniversary party.
Okay.
We did that at Riverbank, and it was sold out. But it sold out within hours,
right? Because
it was the first reunion we did for some time.
But I think you're playing yourself down there a little bit, Sam, because. You know, if you go back to the first reunion, and again, I'm not trying to make out that Venus is the pioneer, but Ian Squire, one of our regulars, massively involved with the club, he put a post on Facebook, and I don't know when the first reunion was, but you're going way back, 10 years maybe?
Yes.
He put Venus the first super club, we should get back together.
Well, Neil Webster is commenting, saying he thinks 2015.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, Neil Webby was there. Yeah, I think Webby came. Yeah.
And that started to build, and the first one was weird and crazy. It was mobbed, as Sam said, and it was probably the first time some of us got together for 20 odd years or whatever. Yeah. And it was novel. It was great. There was that same feeling. I think what happened is then they tried to relive that kind of reunion several times after, and it just died because there was nothing new. It was okay. I've not seen you for a while. I saw you last 6 months ago or whatever. I think what Sam brought was, we're not just going to replay Venus in nostalgia. We're going to do it like Venus would have done it nowadays. It's with the ethos of the club, and do it with the right guest DJs and the right attitude, and want it to be a great party night, not just reliving the past. There was an element of that, but I think Sam brought to it the kind of glamour back and the kind of excitement of what Venus was about.
And it was a bit of fun. It was a great venue as well. Perfect weather. Outside and inside, lovely venue. So people got dressed up and they came, and it was successful. And then obviously I was asked to do a few more, which we did. But then it becomes a little bit, I don't know, just became a bit sort of the samey. And we did that at Blots, which I think was a great venue, lovely outside space. And again, it was very busy. But I was doing it with a couple of guys called Adam and Robin, who were doing pop-up parties. And between us, we were doing some decent nights. My last one I did, which was during the pandemic, which was disappointing because of changing venues, the wrong time of the year, wrong venue, and the pandemic obviously affected people's decision to come to a club. So at that stage, I called it a day. I wouldn't do any more parties. I did a couple of reunions for the Garage Cool Cat with a friend of mine, Dave Cottrell. I used to work there, and then it was the end of it. I wasn't doing any more. And then recently, I was approached by the guys that do the Woodland Disco Festival in Nottingham. They did one last year. It was very successful. And in my day job, I manufacture and print labels and fabric and producing banners and flags for festivals. And they approached me to acquire some banners and flags, and then in that conversation they said, "Do you fancy doing the Venus revival or Venus VIP at the festival?" I thought about it for a while, didn't think I was going to do it, and then thought about it, spoke to my wife, and she said, "Yeah, we should do that." So we then now have this plan to do the festival on July the 8th, again, Christian, Laurie, DJing, Ian Squires, the man who started the Venus Facebook page, is going to sort of play as well. And then we got not some guests, but we got some local guys that are playing as well, called the Neon Hustle. So yeah, and I'm inundated with people wanting to buy tickets for this event. So I think the whole festival vibe is really cool, but having the Venus area is going to be also very popular.
So is that not testament? Because I don't know the guys behind this. Obviously, I've come through you, but there's a new wave of promoters in Nottingham now, obviously. But there is still that legacy that they can't. It's that seminal in the Nottingham history.
Yes,
pulling on the brand. You rightly so are being picky in what you put against the brand. But that's definitely testament to how big the brand was in Nottingham and how it sits in the culture of the city.
Yes. I think there's still a strong. I spoke to the Ryan boys about. They were asked many times to do Money Pennies or Chuff Chuff, and one of the things Mick Ryan said was, "Do I really want to see 60-year-olds, say 50 to 60-year-olds, dancing on a dance floor, trying to dress up in the way they dressed back in the sort of the 90s to 2000? I don't think I want to do that sort of event." So I know that Jim still does the odd Money Pennies event. So I was a little bit sort of hesitant about it, but there's a new audience out there now.
60's the new 40.
Yeah.
Keep telling yourself that, Andy. Keep going with that one, mate. What about 50? What's that, the new 30?
I don't know. 50's fucked. Yeah. That's what 50 is. 50 is fucked.
I've had people contact me who used to come to Venus back in the 90s to say, I'm coming to that festival. I wasn't bothered about the previous events, but I'm definitely coming to that festival because I think it adds a little bit of a different sort of vibe to, the whole festival vibe. We've got this one area that's going to be Venus, the VIP area with posh toilets and nice tables and table service maybe. But then
that's so Venus. That's so Venus, isn't it?
So you got the festival. So
well, let's come back to the festival. Let's come back to the festival in a little while. I just want to pick up with Christian and find out about how and when the steam started to kind of run out of your DJ career, so to speak.
Cheers, Andy. Flip it out.
I'll beat you up at the beginning. I got to strip you down now. Come on.
Of course, no. There's an honest conversation. I think towards the end of the 90s. I think I sort of touched on it earlier. I think there was a little bit of an implosion where, so Venus, the agency, did majority of my bookings along with a couple of others, and it was becoming too regular that you were getting a call on the Wednesday saying the gig on Saturday's cancelled.
Yeah,
and they were issuing contracts, payment in advance, but it was never really enacted in that way. People were still expected to pay you on the night, and I think what happened over the course of probably a very short period of time, in hindsight, maybe 3 to 4 months, I started to see genuinely a proper decline in things were getting cancelled, the bookings weren't coming in. And I think, again, in hindsight, I didn't fight it. I almost felt like I had a bit of an imposter syndrome. I thought, I've done this for 10 years. It's coming to a natural end. I need to go out and get a proper job, as my dad would have said. And I just almost drew a line in my head that I was completely real in that there were people, that were up the leagues, that were working. There were new people coming in. I just thought my time's done now. And I don't think I was alone. I think there was a few in that kind of bracket. The bookings were dropping off. The clubs were closing. There weren't enough clubs to service the circuit of DJs. So I just sort of...
And you didn't want to play UK Garage?
God no. God no. No, I'm joking. No, I think to that point, I think I just felt like my time's up. I think I've done it, and I'm happy with what I've got. I'm not going to pretend I was happy to stop doing it, but I think I sort of resigned to the fact that maybe I've had my time, and I'm never going to be there, and I've had my time here, and it's just come to a natural end.
So over the last 20 years, have every now and again people been contacting you saying, "Oh, we want to do this, we want to do that," or have you just completely stop?
The only thing I've probably done, being completely candid, is I've done the Venus things. I had a few dabbles. I've always sort of still, it's a passion. You don't lose it. I've always sort of kept my eye on it. I've probably missed it more than I would probably claim to
Still
admit.
got all your vinyl?
Most. I've sold a lot. I've sold a lot, but not sold it. I've just realised that some of it is just excess. But I've probably got I probably still have about 15, 20,000 vinyls knocking around.
Wow.
Maybe not that many actually now, but God bless Discogs. But no, I kept them. But every time I started to DJ out, I started to realise the setup is digital. So I would play digital, which I didn't really have a major issue. I like the idea of digital. And it quickly dawned on me that lots of things, with the exception of a core amount of those that are sentimental or important to me, a lot of it is stuff that even if I was to DJ again, I still wouldn't use them. They were just vinyl sat gathering dust. So no, I didn't play out a lot at all, really. It was just part of my history. It was what I did. I missed it, but I didn't crave it to a great degree. What I missed was the involvement in the music and understanding the latest music and that kind of thing.
So how do you find yourself back in the studio with a release out this week? How has that happened?
So, and this is I won't make this a long story. So about just under 2 years ago, a guy that once got me a deal with Virgin for one of my records that didn't really happen, but he was a major club promotions guy from the labels. You know what I'm talking about, Andy. You send out all the 12s in the vinyl, in the mailers. A guy called Adil Rashid, who was a huge guy in the industry, managed Todd Terry's label, managed Todd Terry, played a part in signing things like Alison Limerick and Snap the Power. So he'd been there. He always had my back and always was trying to keep me in the loop. He rang me over Christmas and said, and I think he picked his moment between Christmas and New Year, late in the evening. He knew I'd had a drink at that point. And he basically said, "Would you want to come and play on the radio?" And the radio station is a radio station called Crackers, which not many people will know, but is a famous club from the 70s that was occupied by a DJ called George Power, who founded Kiss FM. He was pioneering the 70s because he was the first guy that played at a club and said, "I'll only play." He was massive in demand for soul and funk. He said, "I'll only play at the club if it's an open door policy, if it's black, white, gay, straight." That was his terms. And it went on to be legendary in those era for disco funk. It was an afternoon session in the middle of London. It changed, but basically George Power was the man. Went on to form part of Kiss FM, sold that, and then set up this station called Crackers, which sounds strange to people. Listen, when you say Crackers, they think it's a children's TV show or something. But it's full of people with huge heritage in the kind of soul and funk and disco. And more recently, they're bringing on people like Georgie Porgy. There's mixes coming from Kenny Dope, David Shaw. It's starting to move from a station based in the past to something that's a bit like Venus. It's using the ethos of Crackers to build a new kind of sound. So he asked me to do it, and I stupidly said yes, and then spent 3 months shitting myself thinking, not only have I got to start getting back interested in music and buying music, although he wanted me for my history, not just all new stuff, but I've got to learn to actually broadcast. I've got to learn to speak. I've got to things I would never have ever thought I could do. And the challenge was quite enticing. And that's 2 years ago, actually, beginning of February, I started doing this on a Friday night, and that reinvigorated the whole thing. I've had a studio here for all this time. So it's like, well, hang on, I can just make records that I want to play on my show. They don't have to be hits. They can just be little projects and that's where I am today.
So tell us about this track that came out on Friday.
Well, one track came out at the end of last year called Feel Love Groove, because my show is called Feel Love Friday with a nod to Donna Summer. So the Feel Love Groove came out, did quite well, got to the top of some of the download charts. The one that came out actually comes out in February. It was on pre-order on Friday, called Move In Close on Disco Down Records. These are, there's a lot of these small kind of digital only labels. It was a project track. It was something, as I said, to play on the show. And there was a little bit of validation when you send it out and somebody says, "Yeah, we put that out." That's what it is.
Good. Love to hear it. So Sam, all queued up for the festival. You said July the 8th.
Well, so I've sort of kept my eye in on sort of some events, and I'm still quite close to some of the guys that put on some of the events in Nottingham, Groovebox being one, the guys Robin and Adam from Tom Brown's. I did a I was involved in an event in Abu Dhabi in November called the Rich List, which was amazing. That was at the Formula One circuit. So when I went there in November, I kind of got that sort of feeling again about being involved with an event. Some great celebrities there, gorgeous weather, and Dubai and Abu Dhabi have got this new sort of thing going on where clubbing's really good, mainly at daytime, like Ibiza. And once I'd sort of been there and came home, I was like, oh God, I got a bit of taste for that. So it was just purely by accident that I got asked to do the Woodland. And so at the moment, we've not launched any tickets, but they are going to launch, I believe, on the 27th of this month. Mm-hmm. And we'll then see what happens. But as I say, it's getting great traction, great sort of attention. We haven't had a festival. Well, we've had festivals in Nottingham called Splendour, which are more family events at the Woodyatt Park. There's been some small festivals. Detonate, I think, is a drum-based event that's done very well at the racecourse. Groovebox have done their festivals and done very well. And they've used a few other venues as well. But the Woodlands kind of opened up a new sort of a crowd, not just into just certain music policy, but just want to come out and have a great time. And it also attracts a nice age group. And I think the guys who have organised it said they wanted to have a more mature age crowd coming along as well, which is why how Venus was born. Mm-hmm. The event for the VIP area. So yeah, it's planning is going very well. And I'm speaking to the guys every day from they're called Active Talent Agency. That's the guy called Barry Almond.
The guys behind it. Well,
they do quite a few events.
Jeff Jefferson is saying, "We're coming, Sam. Hint, hint." I think the lineup's already finished. I think the lineup's done. I've seen the flyers. Yeah. It's all confirmed.
So get this. So I was told when I was first invited to do the event that I would have the resident DJs from Venus and a guest DJ. So I booked Christian and Laurie immediately, and then I started looking at a guest DJ, and then very quickly the guys said to me, "Listen, we're not going to have a guest DJ. You got a small budget," and I won't say what the budget was, but you got a small budget, and that's it. So I've had to work with Christian and Laurie and some other DJs. One of the DJs getting paid nothing, just wants to be involved. So it was a very small budget. So, and really, I think we've got a very cool lineup, all Nottingham DJs, but it's very Venus influenced, and it has to be because you've got another brand called Love Zoo playing. I think they were about 2010 when they started formulating. So they've got their area, and then we've got the disco stage. So they've asked us to play that sort of early 90s to 95, I suppose, sort of music policy, which is aimed at a sort of more mature crowd for the VIP area. It's good to,
I'm sure Christian will have absolutely no issues.
I can't remember how to do that. Terrible.
Well, listen, gentlemen, I am going to say thank you very much for giving me your time this evening. It has been a pleasure, especially listening back and remembering everything that was clearly a big blank in my own mind. That's one of the reasons why I do these conversations, is just basically just so I can remember what I was doing in the late 80s and the early 90s.
You were there, Andy. I saw you. You definitely were there.
Yeah, I definitely was there at some point.
It's good at memory lane sometimes, definitely.
It is beautiful. And I want to say thank you to everyone that's actually passed through and shared some of the comments in the chat. So I'm just going to say thank you so much, gentlemen. Christian, good luck with the releases. And Sam, good luck with the festival, and keep in touch. I will be in touch with you to say thank you a little later on. Right. Any final thoughts? Any final mentions you want to say before we leave?
Well, just look forward to seeing everybody at Woodland Festival. I can't wait to hear Christian's place set on the day. It's going to be very interesting to see what he pulls out of the bag.
Wonderful.
Just echo that. Looking forward to the festival. It's nice to do Venus now and then, not all the time.
Wonderful. Yeah, okay.
Okay,
thanks,
guys.
Andy.
Respect, Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thoroughly enjoyed that. To everybody with me live, we've had a fair few people pushing this on YouTube now every week, focusing a lot on the channel. Music and motivational conversations, the occasional life hack, that is what Inspire and Be Inspired is. And as you can see here, next week we are talking to a gentleman who is really somebody who can just have us sat in awe. I said to myself, do not say Mr. Dr. Bob Jones, 50 years of music excellence. He's going to be in conversation next Monday evening. Thank you to Emily, to Jeff, to John, to Webby. Have a great birthday at the festival, my friend, and everyone else passing through. Thank you so much. All I will say is if you enjoyed that, then do take a look in my playlists for the Soulful House Mafia and the rest of the Inspire and Be Inspired conversations. I also have a playlist that's called Brum as Fuck, excuse the profanity, but most importantly, you may be interested, if you're from Nottingham, in hearing the conversation that I did with Mr. Jonathan Woodliff. That goes back a few months ago, and it was really, really an in-depth look at the beginnings of the Nottingham scene. You may have seen when you logged on, I asked the question, which was the best room at Venus? Downstairs won the vote. Christian will be pleased to know. So there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Check out this next video. Be sure to leave me a like if you've enjoyed it. And I will just say